Good morning and welcome to this morning's event, the CPTPP, How Does It Impact Your Business? For those of you who don't know me, my name is David Wynn and I'm the president of the Canadian Chamber of Commerce in Singapore. The event's been in the works for quite some time. I think we mentioned it in our program earlier in the year, but obviously due to COVID, like everything else, it's been postponed. So we're really looking forward to finally getting it underway. I would like to thank and acknowledge our organizing partners who work with us on this event, the High Commission of Canada in Singapore and the Singapore Business Federation. This next slide, which you probably already saw repeating at the beginning, contains a QR code that directs you to our CanCham website, where you will find a web page of CPTPP resources that have been consolidated from the Government of Canada, the Singapore Ministry of Trade and Industry, Enterprise Singapore, and the Asian Trade Center. This will be available for some time, so feel free to explore the web page after this event. Now, I'd like to introduce our wonderful lineup of speakers who will present in the order they are starting with. First, Jay Allen, Executive Director, Trade Policy Negotiations Asia from Global Affairs Canada. Distinguished Dr. Deborah Elms, Executive Director of the Asian Trade Center. Elizabeth Chelliah, Principal Trade Specialist, Singapore Ministry of Trade and Industry. And last but not least, Locknie Hsu, a longtime member and professor of law at SMU School of Law. These will be followed by a Q&A moderated by Her Excellency Lynn McDonald, High Commissioner of Canada to Singapore. I would like to gently remind speakers to please stay within your allotted time of 5 to 8 minutes so that we have enough time for questions at the end. And now, without further ado, I would like to invite Darius Lim from Singapore Business Federation, ACE, for Global Business Division to say a few words. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Her Excellency Lynn McDonald, High Commissioner of Canada to Singapore, Mr. David Wynn, President of the Canadian Chamber of Commerce in Singapore, ladies and gentlemen, a very good morning and thank you for joining us on this Thursday morning. We are very happy to co-organize this webinar with the Canadian Chamber, one of Singapore's most recognized international business association and a key partner in Singapore's increasing commercial engagement with Canada. I would like to make just 3 points in my introductory remarks. Firstly, the Canadian-Singapore bilateral relationship is long-standing and wide-ranging. After Singapore's independence in 1965, Canada was one of the first countries to establish diplomatic ties with us. Today, both countries cooperate on a range of multilateral platforms, including the Asia-Pacific Cooperation Council and its Business Advisory Council, the World Trade Organization, as well as the Commonwealth, as like-minded partners on a broad range of key international issues, such as rules-based international order, a multilateral trading system, and free and open trade. Secondly, free trade agreements are key tools for businesses to internationalize and become more globally competitive. Singapore's FTAs benefit companies that are engaged in cross-border trade and investment, whether they are based in Singapore or one of our trading partners. FTAs bring about better market access, lower tariffs, and less onerous regulatory compliance processes, helping businesses safeguard their interests and investments. In particular, businesses will value the certainty over trading terms that FTAs bring in a global trading environment that, as we all know, is increasingly dynamic and challenging. We are heartened to have both Canadian and Singapore companies and companies from the region among participants today to hear from our trade experts on the comprehensive and progressive Trans-Pacific Partnership, or CPTPP for short. Finally, the CPTPP is not only the first of its kind, mega regional FTA, but also an agreement that is seen as the gold standard of FTAs. It addresses 21st century trade issues such as e-commerce and intellectual property on top of traditional FTA benefits such as tariff preferences, investment protection, and regulatory certainty. Bringing together countries in Asia Pacific, the CPTPP is also Singapore's first preferential trade agreement with Canada and Mexico. It complements Singapore's existing network of more than 20 FTAs and is envisaged as a step towards further economic integration in the region that will culminate in a free trade area of the Asia Pacific. Today, we have a great lineup of trade and policy experts with deep expertise in this area, and I hope that you will gain a better understanding and discover how to leverage this agreement and capitalize on its benefits for your business. In addition, I would like to encourage you to post any questions you have during the Q&A. If you have any further questions or require assistance navigating the broad range of Singapore's FTAs, you may approach the Singapore Business Federation FTA Education and Outreach team through our post-event email. We welcome the opportunity to help the business community on their FTA journey. I wish everyone a fruitful webinar ahead. And with that, I'll pass the time now to our first speaker, Mr. J. Allen. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Darius. I want to start by acknowledging just what a privilege it is to be here with you all today. I was looking forward to doing this presentation earlier in the year when I could have been there in the room with you, but this is a nice alternative, and I'm really happy that we were able to get together. I'm also really quite honored to be on this panel with such a distinguished group of people. It's a bit humbling, actually. So let me start. I want to say that first off, I think Darius gave a really good overview of my presentation. I'm going to try to keep this to be about a 30,000-foot view of what the CPTPP is, and I'll allow some of my partners up here to go into a little bit more detail. So let's start with the first slide. So what is the CPTPP? I've got a couple of stats up there for you, but really the CPTPP is four things. It's a tool. It's a tool to help businesses grow. It's a tool to help governments and economies grow. It's something that has to be used in order to have value. The CPTPP is also a symbol. So it's a symbol of our commitment to rules-based trade, to open trade, to innovation. It's also an opportunity. The CPTPP is filled with opportunities, whether it's opening of new markets, finding new clients, finding new suppliers, finding new opportunities for your own business to grow even domestically. And finally, I like to term it as a bridge. The CPTPP is a bridge. It's a bridge to new clients, new investors, new suppliers, but it's also a bridge between the CPTPP countries and new partners. We see that the UK wants to join. We've seen interest from Taiwan. We've seen interest from Thailand. Potentially Korea might want to join. So it's a bridge. So it's all of these things. It's also, as has been said, it's the largest regional trade agreement in the Asia Pacific. It's an incredibly diverse group of economies. We've got industrial powerhouses like Japan. We've got resource abundant economies like Canada and Australia. We've got finance and investment hubs like Singapore, and fast emerging economies like Vietnam. So it really is, it is an amazing amalgamation of countries. And not only is it Singapore's first FTA with Canada and Mexico, it's also Canada's first FTA with Australia, Japan, New Zealand, and Vietnam. So it's quite an important one for us. So moving on. The CPTPP is designed to set a standard. It really was meant to be the most ambitious agreement of its type. It's a landmark in the Asia Pacific, but it's also a landmark for global trade. In an era of rising protectionism and trade restricting practices around the world, the CPTPP is a bit of a shining light. It's really something that we should all be aspiring to. When we look at the other negotiations that are out there that Canada's been involved with, we're benchmarking ourselves against the CPTPP now. We also benchmark ourselves against our agreement with Europe and our agreement with the United States and Mexico, but the CPTPP is always the one that stands out. It's the one where we've gone the furthest in a lot of areas. It sets a standard for trade rules in terms of the level of market access that we've given, but also in the level of ambition in other areas, be it in services, be it in areas like government procurement. We're moving ourselves up the chain. As has been said, it eliminates virtually all tariffs on merchandise trade. It removes restrictions on local presence and performance requirements to help make it easier for businesses to do their businesses across borders. It's designed to help businesses succeed in a modern economy. And what do I mean by that? It's got the most advanced IP protections and enforcements out there. It's designed to help protect and inspire innovation. It supports the use of electronic commerce, and it anticipates a digital environment. We know where we're going. This agreement is not about where we've been. This is designed to work for the future. The CPTPP also is designed to create a more stable and predictable environment. It improves regulatory transparency. It encourages the use of international standards. And these will combine, we expect, to help reduce both technical barriers to trade and other non-tariff barriers, because it means that while there won't be a harmonization of rules necessarily, we're going to move towards a set of rules that they get out of each other's way. There's going to be more harmonious relationships. It won't be harmonized, but we're going to have rules that work together and don't get in each other's way. And I think that's a really important thing. Importantly, the CPTPP prevents CPTPP countries from discriminating against businesses from one CPTPP country to another. It allows you to be more competitive as you do business across borders. Moving to the next slide. So in terms of certainty and diversification, and I do apologize, I'll try to get through this a little bit more quickly. I'm not going to tell you anything you don't know, but certainty and diversity and a clear picture of what's going on globally in terms of trade is becoming increasingly difficult. We know that there's rising protectionism. There's for lack of a better term, I'll call it trade tensions between China and the United States. We're seeing an increasing amount of disruption as a result of COVID-19. We're seeing disruption of both global production and consumer demand. So all these things are having an impact on supply chains and making it incredibly important for businesses to ensure that they have resilient and diverse supply chains, to make sure that they have agile and flexible arrangements with their suppliers and their customers. And this is where I think CPTPP is an important bridge. We have the ability to connect you with different suppliers, different clients, different investors, and it also makes Canada then a part of Asian supply chains. And so for us, that's an incredibly important development. It really allows us to be part of Asia. And so it's our bridge to Asia. I'll move to the next slide now, current and future opportunities. The CPTPP is all about opportunities. If we look at what it's done for us today, we're already seeing an increase in trade. We're seeing an increase across the board in agricultural and industrial goods exports. For example, just in our trade with Japan, we've seen an 8% increase over the course of the year 2019. And that's on products where duties were reduced. So that trade is directly increased because of the CPTPP, we think. And that's an incredibly important thing. We were also seeing opportunities for future growth as a result of tariffs falling, non-tariff barriers being knocked down, strengthening and more flexible ability for labor to move, for investors and for service providers to cross borders. These are all really important things that will create opportunities now and into the future. And we're also seeing that in terms of COVID, we're seeing an increased use of digital trade. We're seeing things that we haven't seen before, and the CPTPP anticipates and tries to facilitate this. And that's in terms of of how you're going to connect, what you can connect with, how you can deliver services, and from our perspective as a trade negotiator, I really do think that this is something that is going to be the foundation of our trade between Canada and Singapore and our partners in the region for years to come. Just to wrap it up really, really quickly, I did want to highlight that there's a number of resources that are out there to help you take advantage of it. And as I said, the CPTPP is a tool, and no tool is useful unless you're using it. So we've got a number of things. We've got a website where you've got the link there that has all sorts of information specific to the to using the CPTPP specifically for SMEs. And there's a lot of information there for SMEs. We've got the Canadian Trade Commissioner Service. So if you're a Canadian company, you have access to free and personalized advice and a network of trade commissioners who are in 160 cities around the globe. These trade commissioners can help you with identifying potential markets and partners and prospective clients, not only in the CPTPP region, but also across our network of trade agreements. We're well integrated with Europe. Obviously, we're well integrated with North America. And these are all things that are there. They're tools that are there to help you. And finally, I'll just make a pitch for one last thing, which is the CAN Export Program, which can provide Canadian companies with up to $75,000 to support your expansion with new markets. So these are all programs that are available. Look them up, take advantage of them, and please feel free to reach out if you need any assistance. So my apologies for my connection dropping, but I'll wrap up there, and I look forward to being able to respond to some of your questions later.
Good morning. So I'm delighted to be here talking about the CPTPP. And what I'd like to do is sort of get down to the business of business, which is what I assume most of you are interested in. The reason why we focus so much and have focused so much on the CPTPP all these years is that this is the only agreement that we think will either save you money or find you new markets or both. No matter what you do, no matter where you are, as long as you are doing business between the CPTPP countries, there is cost savings to be had and money to be made. Now, I cannot promise that about all of the other FTAs, and we have hundreds of them here in Asia. CPTPP is where we start when we try to do an assessment of supply chains. For example, when we try to help firms find a competitive edge, we start with CPTPP because it's the only one in which you can promise cost savings, and new markets, and then especially crucial in a COVID period, reduce risk and greater certainty, which is super important for businesses today. So if you're not using the CPTPP, then you should be using the CPTPP. It's been around now for about 1.5 years. The benefits are substantial. They were important to begin with, but now that we are this far into the agreement, it's even better. So the next slide. Just to highlight, we have 7 active members in the CPTPP. Again, it started in December of 2018. So it's very important. It's a very important agreement for you. Next slide. Let me tell you what's different about it. Whenever I give a CPTPP talk, I talk about 3 things in particular. So first, the agreement is broader. It covers all goods. And this is especially important for agricultural goods and food people because generally those are considered sensitive and carved out. They get no benefits or they get limited benefits. TPP covers everything, every good. It covers all services and all investment. That again is unprecedented. Normally when we talk about opening up services in a trade agreement, we carve out important things. So we say, yeah, you can do engineering, but only landscape engineering and only when you're present in the country and all kinds of complications. TPP, all services, all investment, 160 sectors and subsectors already open for your competition. They open up government procurement, not everything that a government buys, but important things. And it opens up e-commerce, which is becoming increasingly important in a COVID situation. So it's broader than most FTAs that we have that are comparable in some ways. It's also much deeper. So instead of having fairly shallow rules, it has additional rules in areas like intellectual property rights. Since most of you are in the business space, you know you live and die on the ideas of your firm. And if those ideas are not protected, or if the protection doesn't extend to the thing that you care about, then it's not helpful for you. So TPP, new rules in IP, some rules limited, but some rules on standards around food safety, electrical appliances, and so forth. But crucially, like a process to try to make sure that we're not making conflicting rules. I think that's important. Some rules on labor, which is not about movement of labor, but about worker rights, competition, policies, customs rules, etc. So it's deeper. The entire agreement, I should show it to you. Oops, actually, this is an old one, is 600 pages in length. So here is the rule book for the CPTPP, and you can see that it's extremely dense legal text. It took people like Liz, years to negotiate this. So it's very deep, very intense. And crucially, I think as well, it has shared norms, which means that all of the members have the same rule book. It doesn't sort of say, like many ASEAN agreements do, when you're good and ready for it, then you can implement the agreement. No, this is the rule. It applies to everyone. And that's crucial when you're doing business across such a diverse group of countries. Next slide. So what does it do on goods? Let me tell this at least briefly. First, as I just said, it covers all goods. So we don't have weird exclusions. There are some complications in textiles. There are some complications a little bit in food, especially in and out of Japan for some things, but in general, all goods, all tariff lines cut. Rules of origin are complicated, but once you sort them out, you can ship without change into all 7 markets right now. And greater market access that we've had, as I said, than any other agreement outside of the European Union and potentially NAFTA. Most products are already duty-free. And if they're not already duty-free, they will be duty-free within another 18 months, basically. So essentially, again, if you're not using TPP to move goods, you are leaving money on the table because the tariff cuts to 0 is very important to you. Next slide. I'm going to skip over this one. This just says that the rules of origin are important to pay attention to. And I would highlight for those of you who are used to using ASEAN agreements, although ASEAN is slowly transitioning in this way, it's product-specific rules of origin. So what does that mean as a manufacturer? It means for every item, there is a matching rule of origin. And so you have to make sure that you are following the rule of origin for your product. It's not like ASEAN where it's a sort of blanket 40 or 45% regional value content that you need to hit. You need to study the agreement and figure out what is the rule of origin that matches this product. And once you do that, you can ship it without change into all TPP markets. You need to also remember that unlike some agreements, CPTPP is self-certifying. So you have to keep the internal documentation to prove for 5 years that your product does meet these rules of origin for this product. So I just want to make that clear because I'm always worried, especially small businesses who keep records on a napkin, that you will lose them before you need them. So save the internal records 5 years, except when you ship to Vietnam where you need a certificate of origin. The next one, I'm going to go over this one. Next one, better rules on trade facilitation. So that's important. And let me just, because 5 minutes goes very, very fast. Let me say most people focus on tariffs. And there's a good reason for that. Again, an agreement that cuts tariffs to 0, that is huge, especially in some sectors where tariffs right now, absent TPP, can be 40, 50%. TPP is even better than some of ASEAN's and Singapore's other agreements. So please do take a look at how to use CPTPP. So we focus a lot on goods. But actually, the biggest benefits in many respects of this agreement are found in investment and services. Now, why do I say that? Because generally, governments are very reluctant to open up services sectors. And my guess, although I have no idea, my guess is that most of you are actually in services jobs. Even if you are manufacturing something, there's a lot of services attached to that. You need legal services, you need warehousing and distribution services, you need retail services and so forth. So in general, governments are reluctant to open services. But TPP, as I just mentioned, opens every service sector with very, very few exceptions. Things like you can't disassemble a car in Japan unless you're in Japan. I don't think that's a huge and catastrophic problem for most of us. So the point is that services are now open and you have, as a result, greater certainty and less risk about providing services. And let me just say briefly, some of you may say, but we already deliver services in some of these markets. You know, we're already in Vietnam delivering health or education services. That may be true. In some cases, you can't have access. So doctors have a hard time sometimes practicing. Some of the equipment can be difficult to get in and out. Some of the imaging software example, difficult. Now opened. So that is unusual in these areas, and it protects that investment, protects your services business. And I think that's very important. There is some movement of people allowed. This is not a free-for-all immigration policy, though. So there's some movement of people, especially for those of you who have to move between branches of your own office. That may be improved. You'll have to ask, especially the Canadian embassies are fabulous at helping you with this information. Next one. Let me just point out, this is peculiar, and I think maybe I should stop after this one. If you are in the services sector, reading the schedules is very confusing because you are not looking for your sector. So what that means is that everything is open unless I tell you otherwise. So you're hoping that you do not see chiropractors if you're a chiropractor, and you will not, which is great. So it's the opposite way that a normal brain works. So if you don't see your sector or your whatever service you want to deliver, excellent news for you, it means it's opened. If you see it, a bit of an issue. So, you know, pay attention to the way in which this is scheduled. Next one. Again, bottom line is that I think you're going to be able to scale, you're going to be able to invest, you're going to be able to deliver services. I think that's extremely important. Next one is the end. So let me just stop there. And again, I'm happy to talk at any time with anyone about how to use the CPTPP or any other FTA. We do a lot of this work. And I'm always delighted to talk CPTPP because, again, that delivers benefits that no other trade agreement can deliver for you because the commitment is so broad, deep, and consistent. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Deb, for your introduction, which helps me segue into my section. So we can start the slide. So I'm going to focus a lot more on goods. So just to tell you, Deborah was just now flashing her book, but this is actually the contents. Those highlighted in blue are all the market access chapters. You can see predominantly they're all related to goods issues. So let me just take you briefly through to excite you, hopefully, into reading some of it and using the CPTPP yourself. Next slide. So, as Deborah said, if you are used to just a general rule, please note that now in CPTPP, we have multiple rules that you can choose from. You have to check what your product-specific rule is. And on top of that, we also have regional accumulation. So I use the example of ice cream. It's very easy to know how you make ice cream. In most FTAs, if you're talking about a 40% rule, it's very hard for a Singapore company to qualify because you can see that only eggs are coming from Singapore. And although even if you use the most expensive egg that we have brought in under COVID, we are unlikely to hit the 40% threshold. So we are looking into how you can accumulate over the region. So even under a VA rule, you can meet it. And under a tariff shift rule, it's even easier. Next slide, please. So as Deborah was saying, it goes beyond tariff. So even for goods, we do a lot more than just preferential market access, because even if you are not manufacturing, if you are doing remanufacturing, MRO services, you have a benefit. MICE activities will benefit because we have a lot and a much broader and deeper temporary admission of goods provisions. Even for those who are in the logistics services, your pallets, your containers, which could be subject to tariffs, even if you're bringing it empty, in TPP, they will not be charged any customs duty as well. There's also a lot more transparency for what the SPS and TBT requirements are. Next slide, please. This is just a snapshot as to what is in the Customs Administration and Trade Facilitation. In these times of COVID, these are all very important provisions because it will help expedite the clearance of the goods, especially for those very essential goods like your PPE, your masks and everything. So please note, all these provisions are there, and a lot of the TPP countries in this time of crisis have improved their own domestic clearance for these goods, which makes it easier for you to have the supply chain within the CPTPP network. Next slide. So we have also new and improved access to government procurement, and this is also for the manufacturing sector. It is greater transparency, and there are new markets for those who are in Singapore, for Mexico and Vietnam, because these two have not been under the WTO GPA system, but now they are in the CPTPP system, and so you can bid for their government contracts. Next slide. And I will not elaborate too much on this because Locknie will be doing most of the talking, and it's the first FTA that started to look at the digital. That's why it's the 21st century element that Deb was referring to. It's not all just in the e-commerce chapter. They are, provided in the various specific chapters, even in financial services. So Locknie will explain more, but this is the first, and just from a Singapore's perspective to say it's the ground foundation for what we are doing now in our digital economy agreements. Next slide. So as parties have said, it's high IP, it has greater protection, it is easier. So even now when you're doing your vaccines and everything, it's something to look into. When you're doing a lot more content on the digital medium, please also pay attention to the IP provisions which are provided there to help your digital content. Next slide. So rules for sustainable trade and level playing field is also there. Next slide, please. Inclusive trade, so this is what, there's a lot more focus on how to help SMEs. So there's a whole chapter on SMEs for which the crux of it is how we're having user-friendly websites targeted at the SMEs. So if you go to the Singapore ESG website, www.fta.gov.sg, and you go to the CPTPP section, you will find that there's a small section there also on information for SMEs, and it links you to all the other TPP country SME websites. So if you want to know more about what's happening in Australia, in Canada, in New Zealand, and even Japan, you can link back to that and find out more as you prep for how to do business in these countries. Next slide. So this is just a quick overview as to how you can take advantage. As I said, just trying to make it a bit more interesting. So you have a company in Singapore that manufactures ice cream. So as I said, they can qualify easier because of the rules of origin, and we call it Shiok ice cream. Next slide. And then they can take advantage because, as Deborah said, there are no exclusions for goods in TPP. Everything is included and there's new market access. Even for Japan, which is traditionally known to be very, very close on agriculture, under CPTPP, they have had to open up every product. It may not always lead to a full tariff elimination, but then you have at least a new market in terms of a tariff quota or at least a reduction in tariff. So this is how Shiok Ice Cream can even try to sell its products into Japan because it's open up there. And next slide, please. So entering the Japan and Asia market, as I said, under Artiga, because it's usually the value add 40%, it will be very difficult, but under the CPTPP, it's easier because of the rules of origin. The greater transparency also helps it understand what are the SPS and TPT regulations, including labeling. A lot of countries now have a lot more stringent nutritional labeling because of all the various gluten and GM concerns that everyone is having and health related. So the transparency will help you understand what you need to do. The next slide, please. So you have the regional accumulation, as I said, and also because it's self-certification, it's cost savings because you do not need to pay money to get the authorized certificate from the authorized authorities. But please make sure that you do your own due diligence. And as Deborah said, please keep the records because at any time there can be a jump-in verification with very little notice given if they fear that you are pretending that your ice cream is coming from Singapore when actually it may come from somewhere else. So just be careful about that. You want to preserve the benefits just for these countries, so it's also in your interest to make sure that you don't discredit the agreement by trying to do otherwise. It will make it very hard for you next time. Next slide, please. So, as I said, there's better customs clearance, it's faster, you can have advanced rulings to know which is your classification, and then there's express shipments, especially if you're sending it over air, it goes in very fast. Next slide. Easier process to register your trademark. So Shiok Ice Cream is a new brand, so how do you do it? It's faster, so pay attention to these IP provisions as well. Next slide. And then, as I said, you can bid for a government tender. So Mexico may be having an event and they're looking for support. So you can bid for it. And because you have the faster express clearance by air, hopefully your ice cream will arrive in very good shape as well. And so distance is not an issue. Of course, this is more opportunity for pre-COVID than during COVID, but I bet you businesses, you can be creative and know how to deal with this as well. Next slide. So next slide, please, because that's just the same. So this is my last slide. So everything you want to know about the resources. So just now I talked about the SME links. They are in the fda.gov.sg. I still use this as the way to go in because ESG, you know, they keep on changing their nomenclature, as you can see from the ESG tariff finder. And to me, it's harder for everyone to remember. fda.gov.sg is catchy. You can remember, you use it, it will take you to the right page. Tariff finder will help you with your assessment as to what the real tariff benefit is and classification and what other standards that you may need to adhere to. So it's a quick finder. Most of the other TPP countries also have something equivalent on their website, so you can also do cross-checks. We have our FTA booklet, which gives you a very brief overview as to what TPP provides you. And as because some of these are our pre-existing FTA members, you can compare with what we have with Australia, with New Zealand in the other agreements and decide which one works best for you. Customs circular then will give you guidance on how to apply for it under a self-certification regime. So that's it. I think this is my last slide. Yeah, happy to take any questions later. Thank you very much.
Hi, good morning, everyone, or good evening, depending on where you are. Thank you very much for the opportunity to be on this excellent panel. I just wanted to share 3 slides with everyone, and they're just to guide us in our discussion, to highlight some of the points that have been excellently introduced by the previous speakers already. So one of the first things I just wanted to mention is when we talk about e-commerce, and that's the name of the chapter in the CPTPP, we tend to think about shopping online. For me, at least, that's my first instinct. Because of COVID, I've had to shop a lot from home. But the CPTPP e-commerce chapter really encompasses a lot more. So what's different? For example, if you think about the chapter, I'm just going to ask you to look at the left side column of the slide for now. What are some of the chapters of interest that link up with the idea of e-commerce that have been mentioned earlier? So trade facilitation moves goods more easily. You might also want to look at the electronic provisions in that chapter in the CPTPP, because it helps your goods move faster because of, for example, transmission of trade and customs information via electronic portals. So that's something relevant as well, not just the e-commerce chapter. The services chapter, the previous speakers also have touched on it. They also, this chapter, excuse me, also has provisions relevant to e-commerce. And of course, the e-commerce chapter will which I will talk about in more detail in a moment. And the SME chapter also ties up nicely if you're SME involved in digital or e-commerce, and the investment chapter if you're going to make an investment in a CPTPP country supplying digital goods, for example. So I return to my first point, which I started with, which is the e-commerce chapter in CPTPP deals with 2 main important things. If you are a company or SME that is selling software, computer programs, digital services, items. So for example, if during the COVID period, you've come up or designed a sort of database to help governments or to help businesses in CPTPP countries track how the disease trajectory moves, for example. I'm just making this up as I go along. That might be something of commercial value that you can sell, and this is something that's potentially covered by the e-commerce chapter. So just to give you an idea, the chapter covers and protects digital products. Digital products means a computer program, text, video, image, sound recording. And here's the catch, it's very broad. Other product that is digitally encoded, produced for commercial sale or distribution, and that can be transmitted electronically. So in the e-commerce definition, e-commerce chapter definition, it's very broad. If you have an item like that, the rules in that chapter and in those associated chapters in the left side of the column of what I'm talking about in the slide could potentially be of interest to protect your business interests. Now, I move to the right side of the slide, and what you might be interested in if you're not producing a database or software, digital product. You might be a business that transacts in goods, for example, but you might need to have transfer of data, right? Most businesses, if not all businesses, have to transfer data of employees, of products, of supply chains, etc., across borders all the time. So when you look at the right side of this slide, the treaty provides protection in what the previous speakers have mentioned, standardization of rules or obligations across CPTPP countries that have put the agreement into effect. So for example, if you have a rule that says you cannot discriminate against digital products which are from a CPTPP country, you must give no less favorable treatment to a digital product coming from Singapore. It must be as favorable as whatever is the best treatment you give to some other country digital product. So those are rules. Those are rules that oblige the CPTPP countries to make sure they protect your interests, right? So those are rules that are important. Now, the second thing in the e-commerce chapter that you might be interested in, there are platforms and mechanisms for developing business opportunities. These are not rules. These are frameworks that allow you to get into the conversation and say, well, how can we find the opportunities? Where are they? Where are the websites and so on? So I'll show you at the end, in the last slide, an example of this. Next slide, please. So this is just to highlight again on the left side, what we're talking about, and I won't go through this in detail because Deborah mentioned in her very good presentation, the array of things covered by the CPTPP agreement, for example, goods, online services, investments, and information for SME in websites and so on. So all these are things that the agreement makes sure are put in place to help businesses move the items and their services more quickly and more efficiently, without meeting a whole lot of barriers. Now, on the right side, this is the practical side, right? For businesses, you want to find the markets and the customers. You've got this fabulous product or computer digital product, but you need to find the opportunities. You need to develop a strategic plan. Are you a supplier to Mexico? Are you a supplier to Canada? Are you a supplier to Vietnam? Or are you sourcing items for your supply chain to sell to these countries, for example? So in considering all this, if it's digital transmissions of data, the chapter will help you, right? If you're supplying digital products, the chapter will help you with the rules. So I put a block at the bottom of the slide where I talk about data protection rules. What am I referring to? For example, the chapter says you will generally have the ability to be able to transfer data freely. Of course, there are always, exceptions in a treaty like this, but generally, flow of data should be allowed. Okay, so and we can talk about more specific examples of rules in the chapter when we get into the discussion later on. Next slide, please. And so this is my final slide. And if you remember, I said at the beginning, there are rules and there are platforms and mechanisms. This is an example of language from the CPTPP e-commerce chapter itself. And this is not to intimidate you. This is one part which I think you don't need legal training to be able to understand, because I wanted to highlight that in chapter 24 for SMEs in particular, if you are involved in digital commerce, if you're an SME, there is a committee established under the CPTPP, which is set up to help SMEs in various ways. So where I've placed the arrows, you will see they are supposed to identify ways to assist SMEs, promote seminars, workshops like this one, facilitate development of programs, and we lawyers or legally trained people, we love paragraph J, any other, right? The boilerplate. So what's the point I'm making here? If you have a trade association, if you're a business, if you're a business organization, these are all ways in which you can reach out to the Committee on SMEs and provide your questions, your feedback to see how this can be actually operationalized, whether we're talking about digital products or actual physical products. So I thought I'd just leave you with this, and you can easily find this online anyway. And just to give you an example, do not be intimidated by the language. There's some useful information there. So I'd be happy to take questions. Thank you.
So bonjour, good morning, everyone. And thank you on behalf of the Government of Canada to our collaborators at CanCham, the Singapore Business Federation, and our distinguished panelists this morning, and of course to all the participants as well. I would say something I say often, which is that we're geographically distant, Canada and Singapore, yet our commercial ties are growing. And in an era of COVID, certainly our focus on multilateralism, on open rules-based trade is only growing in importance. So the chance to connect through events like this are appreciated, and certainly tapping into the CPTPP is one way that we can continue to ensure the economic recovery of our countries in the region through this difficult economic period. We've had quite a few questions that have come in from participants, including live this morning, and my appreciation to Deborah, who's already tackled a number of them on the online chat. I'll step back and ask, perhaps, just start with a question that came up through some of the written in questions in advance of the forum this morning. One was recognizing that the CPTPP is one of a number of agreements that the CPTPP members have engaged either bilaterally or regionally. There's also some others on the horizon, such as the RCEP and also ambitions of Canada to deepen its relationship with its ASEAN partners through an FTA. So I'm wondering if the panelists could comment on how do these agreements fit together? Do they detract? Do they complement? What is the add-on value of this CPTPP to the other network of FTAs in the region? And perhaps I'll ask Liz first to share her perspective from MTI on this question. Over to you, Liz. Thank you.
Hi, thank you very much, Lynn, and for the question. So Singapore is a good place to start because we have multiple overlapping FTA relationships. In fact, we have only 2 new FTA partners under CPTPP, so that's Canada and Mexico. So if you're doing business with Canada and Mexico, you just need to look at CPTPP because there's nothing else for you to use. But for example, if you're seeking to do with Vietnam or Australia or New Zealand, where we have multiple pathways, then the question is, what is it are you looking for? The differences, so they're meant to complement. So if I talk about rules of origin just now in my presentation, I said sometimes you may not be able to meet the rules of origin in the pre-existing bilateral FTA, but CPTPP offers you a wider choice because you're on product-specific rules and you have regional accumulation. So it's for businesses then to assess, yes, maybe your market access commitments are a bit slower because it's starting only from last year is the first cut, whereas for Australia, you're fully implemented and everything already is preferential 0. But if you have not been able to use the ROO under our bilateral FTA, then this is something for you to relook at. Similarly, so for Japan, for example, Japan compared to our bilateral FTA has opened up a lot more in CPTPP. Then there's also all the other complementary aspects of CPTP, which is beyond just a tariff elimination. You have the customs procedures, you have the greater transparency. For SPS, there's greater recourse even for you to raise questions. So what we normally tell our companies is that if it's taking a very long time for your product to be approved, to be exported to Australia, which, you know, because Australia can be very, very fussy since they are an agrarian country, let us know, because the TPP provides an avenue for the government to then raise questions to Australia. No, you're only supposed to take 6 months. How come you're taking 8 months? But if there's no circular feedback within our own business community, then the vast potential of CPTPP then will not be tapped. So events like today help us encourage companies to take a look at CPTPP and continue the feedback to us so that you can see how it complements, especially for all those for which we have pre-existing relations.
Thank you, Liz. And I'll just ask if Jay, if you have any reflection on this in terms of Canada's own sort of network of trade agreements and how CPTPP complements those, or the future plan in terms of engagement with this region.
Yeah, thanks, Lynn. You know, I think Liz was absolutely right. These agreements complement one another, and as I said in my initial presentation, they're tools, and so in everybody's tool bag, you should have multiple tools. You don't just have one tool. You find the right tool for the right circumstance. And so, as was said, CPTPP is a tool that we can use. Now, it is Canada's first FTA with most of the CPTPP countries. So for us, it does create a new opportunity. But for us, one of our goals in Canada is to diversify our trade. We're looking to deepen our engagement, and Southeast Asia is one of the regions where we're really looking to deepen it. And so, Lynn, you mentioned our ambitions with ASEAN. We are certainly looking to develop an FTA with ASEAN. We're in the process. We've completed our exploratory discussions, so we're looking to do that. And certainly that would have some overlap with our ASEAN or with our CPTPP partners, but the rules may be slightly different, and so there may be advantageous rules under one agreement that a company may want to use. But we see them as really working in harmony, and from a Canadian perspective, we tend to take the same approach in our FTAs. We try to have rules that will fit, and while tariff elimination and rules of origin, some of those things may not line up perfectly. We try to make sure that the others, in terms of non-tariff barriers and TBT rules, SPS rules, that they all try to work together and they try to fit together. So we do see them as being largely complementary.
Great, thank you. And I'm sorry, I know we're fairly short on time, but one of the other points that has been of interest both online and in the earlier questions was about future membership in the CPTPP, and also the sort of status of the current members in terms of ratifying and being fully sort of ready to implement the obligations. And I thought I might turn to Deborah for her, so if you could give us a quick overview on that front, Deborah, thank you.
Sure. I mean, it's easier for me because I'm not in government, so I'm not revealing state secrets if I tell you who's in line. So they're meeting on August 5th, actually, to discuss accession. It will be interesting to see whether countries are formally admitted, whether we come up with some version of in progress or in process or observer type status for potential members, or whether we have no new members. I would hope, for the sake of the agreement, that we get new members, because the TPP is super important. It's important that it expands. It's important for new members to be part of it because it reforms your domestic trade landscape. And at a time where everyone is looking for competitive edge, being in the TPP is better than not being in the TPP. So I hope they come forward. There are 4 countries that are the most likely potential members. So the UK has expressed repeated interest and has gone the furthest towards the formal process of getting in. Taiwan is very eager to get in, a bit challenging politically, but they're super interested and they're very organized. South Korea has flirted with being in the CPTPP and the TPP for an eternity and may eventually come back in again. Would be good for them, would be good for the TPP. And the last one that's in line, that's again sort of flirting with the idea, is Thailand, which I think also crucial given Thailand's disastrous economic situation at the moment. Would be great to have them in. So those are the 4 countries that are most likely. There are also 4 members of the TPP, CPTPP, who have not yet ratified it domestically, including, crucially for us, in Singapore, Malaysia, and Brunei, as well as Chile and Peru. So we really need those 4 to be part of the existing agreement as well, so that we make it grow and make it bigger.
Thanks, Deborah. And part of what you picked up on, and a number did in the presentations, is the opportunity and I suppose the tools that CPTPP presents as economies try to recover from the COVID pandemic and the ongoing disruption that's caused. And Locknie, I was just going to turn to you to say, you flagged about in terms of the digital trade, and others picked up on that too, in the sense that with COVID, we're seeing companies and so on focusing on in a sense, the digital space a bit more. And do you see areas that, for the participants calling into this webinar who may be exploring further e-commerce and other opportunities, some of the areas where perhaps you could just highlight again some of the areas where you feel that the CPTPP may be beneficial to them as they look to organize and regroup in the current state of economic recession disruption?
Yeah, sure, thanks. I think one of the things that I didn't mention was the opportunity potentially to take part in government procurement activities, which are available under many different sectors and government entities of the CPTPP countries. So for example, if you're devising some sort of database, or if you have some kind of digital product that could help governments and they might be interested in buying it from your company, these are opportunities that can be checked out under the government procurement chapter, for example. And it links up to e-commerce as well, because it's digital products that you're putting forward. So that's one area. Another area is if you are dealing with physical products, if you are trying to get food or items or computer hardware for example, my camera on my notebook broke down, I can't get supplies. So if within the CPTPP region, you can get trade facilitation, movement of goods more easily, why not? That's a good space to explore as well. So it could be physical goods, it could be digital goods, it could be for SMEs dealing with these, and it could be to sell, to supply to private businesses or to governments, for example. So these are all spaces for opportunities to be explored.
And there have been a series of quite specific questions that have come in, and I will just remind those on the calling into the webinar that there are a series of material available, both that that Liz has shared and Jay, in terms of both on the Singaporean and Canadian government side, but also that will be compiled under the CanCham website. We'll be speaking with individual panelists to see about the decks as well, and whether that may be something that we can offer to those who have participated today. I will mention that in terms of for information on specific sectors and specific questions, if the material is not does not cover your question, then as my colleague Jay mentioned, on the Canadian side, there is the Trade Commissioner Service who can offer some assistance, and I know as well from the Singapore government that type of advice or being able to point you to the right section is also there. So if you don't feel like going through the 600 pages of as Deborah held up the text, there are ways to access that information and get the useful sort of sector-specific info that you need. One question that did come up, which I may have missed, but I'm not sure that was covered, was the issue of mobility. Is there someone that can speak to that? The question was asked about whether CPTPP covers labor mobility. Is someone who's willing to take that one on? I see Jay smiling, but also Deborah nodding. So I'll turn over to you, Jay, because you can blame me because we're both Canadian on this one. So over to you.
Sure, I'll try to do my best. I am not a labor mobility specialist, but the agreement does cover labor mobility. It does facilitate the movement of business people. Each country has taken their own commitments, so each country bilaterally has agreed to certain groups that would be covered. So not every profession is going to be covered by every party. So you have to look at what the actual text of the agreement says, because some countries will allow in more than other countries, and the list won't be the same between them. One other important thing about labor mobility is that it is not a substitute for immigration. So I just want to make sure that that's clear, that you're coming in, these are meant to be short-term, they're meant to be to facilitate a specific service or a job package. So that's what I can remember from my labor lead or my mobility lead.
Thanks, Jay, and I'll just open the floor to other panelists if they had any final comments on an area that I haven't picked up on. We're over time, so I'm about to turn it back to Nicole and the Singapore Business Federation to close off. But if there's a critical piece of information you'd like to share, any of the other panelists, please take this opportunity and just raise your hand and we'll, yes, Locknie.
Yes, thank you. I just want to mention something I think that came in the list of questions earlier, which we haven't really touched on. And there are various provisions throughout the CPTPP chapters that deal with most favored nation treatment. And that's very important in terms of non-discrimination protection for businesses. So if you're doing business, let's take the e-commerce chapter. If you're for example, selling across borders within the CPTPP, a digital product, which is covered by the agreement, there is a promise, an obligation by CPTPP countries not to discriminate against your digital product. You must be given no less favorable treatment than a like digital product from any other country, or in fact any other party or non-party. There's a footnote that even includes non-parties. So that's very wide, which means you must be given the best treatment that's out there, that's afforded by that country to digital products. So that's a very powerful rule that protects businesses. And so there are MFN provisions throughout, not just this one. Thank you.
Many thanks, Locknie. Very critical point and a valuable essence to the benefits of the CPTPP to all members and companies within the members. So at this point, I'd like to turn, oh, sorry, Liz.
Thank you very much. No, there was an earlier question on the true definition of remanufacturing goods, and I thought I'd like to just touch on this because especially now when we're looking into sustainable trade and all that. So what is the difference between a remanufactured and a used good is that it comes with a like new certificate. So you're treating the used good as though it's a like new with a warranty, and we are actually encouraging in this time of circular economy and everything, how more and more sectors can move towards trying to find out how you can be confident that after you repair the good, you're going to give it the same like new warranty, and that will encourage a bit more benefit for sustainable environment. So when we were negotiating this, we said, you know, with all the focus now, it's something that we should encourage. So that's why I thought I'd just like to touch on this question. In this day and age, it just means if you are willing to give a like new warranty for your repaired or reused good, it will be deemed to be a remanufactured good, and it will be qualifying under other provisions for faster movement under the CPTPP. So in this day and age, something for companies to think about and innovate. Thanks.
Thank you, Liz. And just before I turn over to this Nicole at the Singapore Business Federation to close our webinar, I did see some other questions coming in specifically about seafood and seafood exports. So I'm going to just take the opportunity of having the moderator role to note that for those that are interested, starting in about 5 minutes on Facebook, on the Canadian High Commission Singapore Facebook page, our fantastic Singaporean chef at the official residence is doing a live cooking demonstration of Canadian lobster, which is available here in Singapore. Delicious. Anand is a fantastic chef. He's doing a live demo. So when you're finished this webinar, please switch over to Facebook Live on the High Commission site and watch a nice melding of Singaporean and Canadian cuisine, and then you'll find out how to get those seafood exports here in Singapore. So on that culinary note, I'll turn the floor over to Nicole with thanks from us at the High Commission.
So thank you, speakers. I'll close it up soon so everyone can join in the Facebook Live. So I think it has been a really insightful webinar with many practical takeaways for the audience. Very big thank you once again to all our speakers for taking the time today to speak with us on CPTPP. Please do check out the resources page, and if you have any further questions on FTA, please feel free to approach us. The link and the team email can be found in the chat box. So thank you everyone, and have a good day ahead.
Thank you.